Before we get into the class, I've asked Darren if he would to lead us in a word of prayer.
Father, we thank you for this day that you've given us to come together to worship you and come to this class this morning to learn more about your word and the ways that we need to apply them to our lives. We thank you for so much of the better health that many have, but we ask you to continue to watch over those that are still having struggles with their health. Continue to be with us as we live our lives, that we try to strive closer and closer to you and live the way that you want us to live. We thank you so much for Christ, and especially for the sacrifice that he made on the cross for our sins. We ask forgiveness for those sins this time, Lord. In his name that we pray. Amen.
Thank you. So this week we are in lesson 6 of the workbook. In the scripture, it's 1 Timothy 5, verses 1 through 16. So the title of the lesson in the workbook is Dealing with Different Groups, and really this entire chapter of 1 Timothy chapter 5 is dealing with treatment of church members. We have members that are in different classes. There are different ages, different stages of life, and there's ways on how we should work with them, deal with them, how we should treat them. And this chapter provides some valuable instructions for us in that regard. So let's go ahead and get into the scripture. I'm going to read the first 2 verses, 1 Timothy 5, verses 1 and 2. 1 Timothy 5, verses 1 through 2 says, "Do not rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters, with all purity." So I think the King James Version uses the term elder, but the better rendering, I think, is the New King James Version. It's not the office of an elder, but we're talking about an older person here. One, in seniority of age. We've all heard that saying, we need to respect our elders, and that's, referring to, older people. Proverbs 16:31 says, "The silver-haired head is a crown of glory if it is found in the way of righteousness." So these older men, they deserve our honor and respect. And then it says that we're not to rebuke them. It says, "Rebuke not an older man." So what does this mean? Do not rebuke an older man.
I don't think it means we can't correct behaviors.
Right.
I think we have to be cautious and respectful and do it in an honorable way, though.
Yeah, and I think that's the point here. When you look at the word rebuke, it means to chastise, treat harshly. And it doesn't mean that we don't correct them at all, but there's a way that we should go about doing it. And so how is that? How should we go about doing that? How do we treat them?
With respect.
Honor. Right. Yeah. So you treat them like you would your father. You love your father. You're probably not going to come down hard on your father, but it says I think the New King James Version says to exhort them, which is to urge them. The King James Version uses entreat. And so when I looked up this entreat, it means to beseech, to beg. It means to ask urgently and fervently to do something, to implore or beg someone earnestly and desperately. And again, you treat them like your father. You'd have respect for your father, and you'd sincerely care for them, and you would beg and you would plead with them to change because you want what's best. Anybody have any comments on that or further thoughts? And we go on, and it's the same, with older women in the church. You treat them the same way. You treat them like you would your mother, with honor and respect. If they needed correcting, you would beg, plead with them, to change because you love them. And then it says, you treat younger men like you would a brother, and younger women like you would a sister. You treat them like you would your family. And, your brother, your sister, your mother and father, you treat them with love. And then it says with all purity, nothing sinful. That it's chaste, it's pure, it's innocent. And I do think Paul recognizes here the danger of men and women together. Specifically, he's with Timothy, a young preacher, working with women. He needs to be on guard. He needs to guard himself against any kind of indiscretion. His proper conduct is a must. So there's nothing sinful here. This idea of entreat, it's not really something that I have given a lot of thought to until now, but it's interesting. I do think maybe at times we tend to come down harshly on those that are in sin and not doing right. We want to correct them, and we may even have good intentions of that. But this talks about the idea of begging, pleading with them. And I'm just wondering if we need to do a better job of that. I can think of a couple of people that if I did that with it, maybe it might make a difference in getting them to come back. If we were to beg with them and plead with them, and instead of coming down harshly and condemning them, which may be the right thing, they are not living right. But if we were to handle it differently, would we have more success? Yes.
I think that the very important thing is love. Even if you're correcting someone, if you're doing it in a manner that they feel the love out of you, like you said, when you're pleading and you're begging, you're not lording it over them and acting like I am superior than you. Because even when you do good to someone, if you're not doing it with that proper love, it doesn't feel good.
Right.
And they want to run from you.
Yeah, that's true. Anybody have any other comments on this? Thoughts? Okay, so let's go ahead and let's read the next verses 3 through 16. If someone would, I know it's kind of long, but would someone read verses 3 through 16 for us?
3 through what?
16.
Honor widows that are widows indeed. But if any widow have children or nephews, let them learn first to show piety at home, and to requite their parents, for that is good and acceptable before God. Now she that is a widow indeed and desolate trusteth in God, and continueth in supplications and prayer day and night. But she that liveth in pleasure is dead while she liveth. And these things give in charge, that they may be blameless. But if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith, and is worse than an infidel. Let not a widow be taken into the number under 80 years old, having been the wife of one man, well reported of for good works, if she have brought up children, if she have lodged strangers, if she have washed the saints' feet, if she have relieved the afflicted, if she have diligently followed every good work. But the younger widows refuse, for when they have begun to wax wanton against Christ, they will marry, having damnation because they have cast off their first faith. And withal they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers also, and busybodies, speaking things which they ought not. I will therefore that the younger women marry, bear children, guide the house, give none occasion to the adversity to speak reproachfully. For some are already turned aside after Satan. If any man or woman that believeth have widows, let them relieve them, and let not the church be charged, that they may relieve them that are widows indeed.
Okay, so now Paul is addressing another class in the church that special attention needs to be brought to. And it starts out, honor widows who are really widows. What does this honor mean? It says honor widows that are truly widows. Any thoughts on this?
Give them due respect.
Right. Yeah. It is respectful. We show them respect. This honor means respect, esteem, to value something. Also, what goes along with this word honor is material sustenance, as the book points out. So the context of this too includes some financial support for those that are really widows, truly widows. If you look at verse 17, and I know we didn't read this, but in verse 17 of this same chapter, this same honor is used and includes this financial support. It says, "Let the elders who rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in the word and doctrine." So this honor, and we'll talk more about this next week, includes financial support. Also, if someone would read Mark 7, 8 through 13. Mark 7, verses 8 through 13.
For laying aside the commandment of God, you hold the tradition of men, the washing of pitchers and cups, and many other such things you do. He said to them, all too well, you reject the commandment of God, that you may keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father and mother, let him be put to death. But you say, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is spoken, that is a gift of God, then you no longer let him do anything for his father or his mother.
And so, again, here we see this honoring. It's the honoring of their mother and father, but it's about taking care of them, and then taking care of them financially too, if they need. And so these widows, indeed, they're those who are destitute, and it says they don't have any children or grandchildren to care for them. And Dad read out of the King James Version, and it said the word nephews. But when you look at that Greek word, when you go, it just refers you to grandchildren. And so the New King James Version uses the word grandchildren, and I think that's probably a better translation. But grandchildren, it just means born of, a child, those descendants in a direct line. So again, I think most versions, are now using the term grandchildren. So only those who are truly widows, destitute, no children or grandchildren, can receive this financial support from the church. When it talks about, what was the word? Enrolling them? Is that what the word that was used? Can't remember. Oh, taken into the number. To me, this seems to be referencing an ongoing support. It's kind of like, putting them on the payroll. It seems to me. I don't get that it's just a one-time thing or to help, but it's something that's ongoing. They're a widow indeed. They're someone that doesn't have anybody to care for them. They're destitute, and so there's an ongoing, taking care of them. And so there's qualification before they can be put into this, enrolled in this, or taken into the number. There's some qualifications, for them. So it is the children's and grandchildren's responsibility to care for their aged parents. We take care of them and show reverence towards them. It's our duty. We owe it to them. And actually, it's a condition of being accepted, by God. And it pleases God, when we do this. And if there's children or grandchildren that can take care of the widow, then the church is not burdened. So the church can really take care of those widows that are truly in need.
I have a question.
Sure.
What if the children and grandchildren are not financially capable of taking care of the widow?
Yeah, that's I'm kind of interested, because I thought about that too. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
What was it?
If the aged parents have children, but they're not capable of taking care of them, or they refuse to take care of them, then can they be brought into the number?
Well, to me, there's more than financially taking care of them too. There's programs and steps to help financially that they can get that can help you just take care of them. So I think it's still your obligation, because I don't have the money to support my parents, but I can take care of my parents when they get older, just like I did my grandmother. They have, I think that's the responsibility that you have.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point. I mean, there are other ways to care for them other than financial. It would certainly be obligated to do that. But anybody have any other thoughts on that?
I've seen some different situations where people would take a widow into their home and try and care for them. It doesn't always work out, because as we get older, we get lonely. But, it's not just that health problems and different things might be too much for me to take care of someone, but I have seen it done a lot in very large congregations especially. And they would take a widow in and take care of, just take them like they were their own.
Yeah, that's also a good point. As a member, we can take them in ourselves or provide for them individually. Members can, instead of being in the role or enrolled in the program or whatever they want to call it. But I don't know that I'm 100% sure on your question. I think there's some judgment involved. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, in the words of a lawyer friend of mine, I think it just depends. Depends on what the scenario is. Am I capable of taking care of, my dad? At this point I am. And is a child able to go to work? Maybe they're incapacitated, and they can't go to work. But like Sonny said, they could also seek out the government assistance and things like that to help their parents, and not only the financial, but maybe a housing, those types of things. So I think it all just depends on everything that's involved in it. It's just not cut and dry.
But I was thinking too, if like you said, if we're a family and we love, if we have that proper love, and every situation is different, it would have to be evaluated, and if you have the elders would talk about it. And there's things that we might could do to even assist someone that's helping their parent, I mean, that would be a thought as well. So it's not charging the church, but as individuals, there's things we might can do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and we're gonna get into it the rest in the later lesson. That the church has a responsibility, and it's laid out pretty clear and it's specific. But the individual has a responsibility. An individual can do things that the church cannot do in the area of benevolence and things like that. And I think we need to keep those separated. My granddad was a real good example. He was an elder of church there in Spiro, Oklahoma. He never refused anyone that came to his door, but he didn't charge the church. He took care of it himself. And I think that's what we need to do, is we need to keep in mind that the church has some restrictions on who we can help and so forth, and our responsibility as a church member. But then we have an individual responsibility as a human being and as a Christian to do what we can in that aspect as well. But it seems like to me what I've seen in my lifetime in the church is they're just looking for somebody to take care of. And that's not the purpose. There has to be a need first of all. And then the second thing, it has to be a scriptural basis of providing for them. And the thing about it is there are people that want to take money out of the church treasury that plead these cases, and play on your emotions and talk about, well, this poor little orphan kid, And it pulls at your heartstrings and stuff. But we still have to adhere to what Paul, and speaking by inspiration and others, said about benevolence, and we have to be very careful and adhere to that. He said this for a reason, and there's a reason for all this. And we may not understand it exactly, but we still have to adhere to it.
Right. Yeah, and we're gonna get into some of these further qualifications too, and, there's a couple of them, or at least one of them, that I don't know that I fully understand, but I know what it says, and, we'll talk about that. But, so in verse 5, it starts out with now, okay? So, now she who is really a widow and left alone, so this is in contrast to what was talked about above, where they had family, they weren't truly destitute. So now, if they are truly a widow indeed, they don't have any family to take care of them, they're desolate. If that's the case, then there's some further qualifications that she must meet before the financial support can be given. And so that's in verses 5, 6, and 7. So what are they? What are those qualifications or further requirements?
She's desolate, she trusts in God.
Okay, she trusts in God, so she's faithful to the Lord. What else?
Continues in supplication and prayers night and day.
Yep, she continues in supplications and prayer night and day. She's a prayerful woman. Her faith and her trust is in God. So what else is there?
Remain blameless.
Okay, so she's not to live in pleasure, doesn't seek the sinful pleasures of life. In verse 6 it says if she does, she's spiritually dead, or she's dead in her trespasses, and she's not eligible for the financial help by the church. But her aim must be to please God.
The wife of only one man.
Yep, and so that's right. We're gonna get into some of those. There's some further qualifications or requirements too. But in verse 7 it says, "And these things command." That they may be blameless. And so, the church has requirements, and the widow has requirements as well. The church can't assist a widow that doesn't meet these qualifications. They must be blameless in that. And then the widow is not entitled to these, the financial support if she doesn't qualify. And I think that's the idea here, is that, the church and the widow must be blameless in this and these instructions. And, this blameless, must be unrebukable, not guilty of going against what this is saying. We must follow these instructions. In verse 8, it says, if you fail to provide for your own, especially those that live with you, you've denied the faith, and you're worse than an unbeliever. Any ideas on how can you be worse than an unbeliever if you don't do this? Any thoughts on
Because
that?
you're not following it.
Because you know better and you're not following it.
By not rejecting
Yeah.
After I've said all of that, there's the other side of the coin too, that we need to be very careful about. And that is to use this, because there are restrictions placed on who we can help out, to never do anything. And that's a caution that we really need to take into consideration, because we do have a responsibility to help individuals. And so I think sometimes what we do is we say, well, there's restrictions placed on that, so we're just not going to do anything. And I've said this, and I may be wrong, but I would rather err on the side, of helping someone than err on the side of not helping them. And I think sometimes we don't help people when we really should help people, because we say, oh, there's restrictions on that. And we can't investigate every situation. We're not an investigative body. So it's something on the surface that we can help them with, we should help them. And I think too many times we look at these requirements and say, well, we got to investigate and do all this stuff. In the meantime, somebody's in destitute and really needs.
Right.
I know a needy widow that's 84 years old, And it's gonna have to change churches, because you can't get someone to pick her up on Wednesday night. She wants to go to church all the time. That's not right.
No, it's not. Did you have something?
Well, you know, this is not just about the widowers, but I read a thing yesterday on Facebook when Friends of Midwest City, and the homeless were trying to get housed, and they were, blaming the churches for not doing it, letting them in, and, I was sitting there, that Jesus would help everybody. What do you tell some? It's hard to tell somebody when you're not willing to help them that you're.
Yeah, well, I think and that's kind of getting a little bit off what we're talking about, but it's not the church's responsibility, to take care of the world,
But again, it's individual, and, if you can get more than one individual if there's a real need. That's the key, is if you knew someone's need.
Yeah, to help them individually, you certainly could, individually, you can help anybody you want, but as far as, taking money out of the treasury, it's for members.
Well, they were just opening up their doors so they could come in. But then you can't trust, you're going back and forth whether you can trust them but maybe you could bring someone to the Lord if you opened up your doors and
You're just talking about opening it up and giving them a place
to stay until that's what they were talking about. And they were saying that there wasn't enough people that were doing it
Because of the cold weather?
Because of the cold weather.
Okay.
Well, a lot of these homeless people have got mental problems. It can be dangerous to invite them in, and that's why we have these restrictions. They're not our responsibility. I don't know the percentage of them that are homeless because they don't want to go into a shelter. They don't want to accept the restrictions that are placed on there. On most of these shelters, you can't drink, you can't do drugs. They separate them sometimes. And these people, a lot of them do not want to do that, and they do not fit our requirements.
Right. Yeah, been here by choice.
A lot of times in those places, they require you work, like you have to do manual help for your keep. And like Bill was saying, a lot of them don't want to do that.
Yeah. But as far as helping out of the church treasury, I think that it has to be a member, or, a Christian that's in need, before you can help. But getting back to our lesson, it does say if you fail to provide for your own, especially those who live with you, you've denied the faith. So, and I think this is really taking care of your own family, providing for your own, if you have widows in your family or people in your family, if you fail to provide for them, you're missing the mark. You're denying the faith. You're not being obedient to what the Lord wants us to do, and you're worse than an unbeliever. Even an unbeliever, will care for their family. A lot of them, and so if you won't do that, if you're not going to provide for your own, then you're not only are you not obedient, you've fallen, missed the mark with your faith. You're worse than them because even they will take care of their own family. So and then in verse 9 and 10, we get into some further instructions. It says, they're mentioning age. They have to be, 60 plus. Someone that's under 60 doesn't qualify. And then there's the wife of one man, as Bill mentioned. I think the idea here is that no more than one husband living at a time. So it must be a scriptural marriage. She must not have been an adulteress or a polygamist. Somebody read Romans 7:3. It gives little instructions for us too. Romans 7:3.
So then, if while her husband liveth, she be married to another man, she shall be called an adulteress. But if her husband be dead, she is free from that law, so that she is no adulteress, though she be married to another man.
Yeah. So I don't think that it means, when it says the wife of one man, I I mean, if her first husband died and she married again, and then something, he died, I don't think that means she was married twice. I just kind of think it means that she wasn't a polygamist, which was common, from what I read, was common during that time, and she's not an adulteress. Anybody have any thoughts or comments on that?
Now that, I think you're right, that's polygamy was rampant at this particular time.
Yeah.
In the early church, and I think that's speaking against polygamy.
Yeah. And then it says she must be well reported. What does that mean?
Good character,
Good
she's not,
character.
no one has anything evil to say about it.
Yeah. Good reputation. Yeah.
She has to have the reputation, she has to be known to have been doing good work.
Yeah. That's
Not
good.
just
Yeah.
doing good work, so it has to be obvious.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. She's well thought of by everyone because of her faithfulness and good deeds. And then, helping others. And then it says, brought up children. That's a requirement that she has brought up children. This is the one that I was mentioning. It's a little bit, hard for me to understand, but, reading some commentaries, I didn't get a lot, from that, other than they said, didn't necessarily have to be her own children. She could bring up, her own. She could bring up orphans or, help neglected children, that sort of thing. Rick?
I think if you'll notice, in verse 9, it's do not, or not unless. When you get to this verse, it says if she brought up children. I think that if allows for a woman that was unable to have kids or never had children of her own, can't be held responsible to bring somebody up and not be accepted as a widow indeed. I think that's the purpose of the if, in my opinion, is that if this happened, it's not, it must happen or gotta happen, it's if it happens. And all the rest of these verses after that, if she's lodged, if she's washed, if she's relieved, if she's had diligently followed every good work. I think these are the ifs there, because sometimes some of these things, they just can't accomplish.
Yeah. Anybody have any thoughts on that, or? I kind of see it a little bit different. I don't know. I mean, and I'm not saying I'm right. I don't know. Maybe you're right here. It seems to me like these are all requirements, but I could be wrong. I mean,
The one thing that kind of puzzles me, if she did have children, I mean, that things can happen, but you would think if she had children, those children would still see to their mother. So that's kind of,
yeah.
but every situation is different.
Right. I can't say that I understand everything,
Yeah.
Here. Rick, you very well could be right. When I look at these, she can't be enrolled in this unless she's done these things. But that's,
I kind of saw it as examples.
That's what I was
Like
gonna say.
if she has, those were possible examples of good works.
but not necessarily a requirement.
Yeah, not like a check,
Yeah, because what
If
if
she's
what
brought
if
it.
she never had the opportunity to like lodge strangers? I mean, that's not her fault.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, I think that the idea behind that is the hospitality. Is she hospitable? But yeah, no, that makes sense. That may be what it is. Anybody have any other comments? Or?
But like you said, it probably shouldn't be just a check. It's more of the whole encompassing thing about what is her character.
And I know the punctuation back in the original Greek was 6 hours. But when it says that well reported good works, it does have a semicolon there in the New King James Version, and then it says all those ifs. So I agree. I think it's more of an example of those things to help prove that she does good works.
Yeah.
But I don't think those are requirements.
I think it shows the proof of her character.
Yes.
But if you get into these what ifs, does a and I have to ask this, I'm sorry, but what if it's an old man under these same situations? His children have died, he's destitute, is he subject for help? This says widow, it doesn't say a thing about an old man, but it's part of the family. Family of God, you know? So, but sorry.
No, that's good. It doesn't mention man. I don't know why. I don't know. If anybody has any thoughts on that, I'd like to hear them.
Well, they're elder. It's an elder. We're supposed to honor, respect them, and depending on their situation, I mean, I would think that a local body would look and see what the need was. And if there was an elder man or an elder woman and a good character, then that would be a choice that the individual church would make.
Yeah. I'd have a little bit of a hard time of enrolling them into the ongoing support.
Yeah.
I may need to rethink that, but I mean, as far as, the church helping them and assisting or helping that person individually, I certainly think, you could do that, but the ongoing, putting them on this payroll, like, I don't know, since it doesn't mention,
We have all the government programs today, but back then, there weren't no government programs, so there was people starving. So you looked at it a lot different back then.
Yeah.
And also, men normally, and women too today, they generally have some type of retirement. So even if they're older, they generally have some money or income coming in.
Right.
But every situation can be different, but as a whole, that would be a very money, there would hardly ever occur.
Yeah, and we're fortunate in this country that, we have, if you've worked, you got Social Security and things like that, that help out. So, we don't probably typically come across this as much as maybe other countries do. And so, anyway, it gets into the lodging strangers. This is being hospitable, washing the saints' feet. This is associated with the lodging the strangers. The idea is that, they traveled long journeys wearing sandals or barefoot. So when they arrived, it showed hospitality and it also showed humility. Some people have taken this and changed it into an act of worship, which is, it's incorrect. But the point is that she ministered to the needs of others. She's hospitable. She's lodged strangers. She's diligently followed every good work. She's faithful and she's living it. So getting back to verse 9, we already talked about this a little bit, but that taken into the number, to me, those are those who are enrolled in receiving this ongoing support. And so only those that have met these requirements are eligible. And then we get into verse 11, and it says, refuse the younger women, or the younger widows. So when I see the younger widows, it would be under 60, right? I mean, 60 and older are eligible, so under 60, I think this would be the younger women. And they're not to be brought in to this number. Why is that?
They would generally want to marry, not necessarily, but
Yeah.
or they're capable in today's society to work and make an income.
Yeah. Yeah, it mentions the possibility of remarriage. It says their desire could become strong. With younger women, it may cause them to want to remarry. And there's nothing wrong with that, remarrying. I mean, it'd be natural. But being single and being enrolled in this church support, there could be an issue with that. What does it talk about that there could be an issue?
Idleness, they would be idle.
They could be idle. I don't know if they got too much time, on their hands. And what does it say? There's a danger of them becoming gossips. Yeah, busybodies. Busybodies, gossip. And it says in verse 14, he'd rather them remarry, bear children, manage the house. It keeps them busy with this good work. Raising a family is good work, and it's really it's a woman's natural calling. I mean, there's no position greater for a woman than to be a mother and manager of the house, and there's no position of greater honor. And this is her God-ordained role. Yes.
We talk a lot, we've been mentioning present situation. Social Security, going out and getting a job. In that day, there were not a lot of places that a widow could go out and make a living. There's always the old profession, and that's what some of them had to fall back on. That's why the urge for a young woman, in order to support herself, would seek out a man and get married so that he could support her. She couldn't support herself. She had to have them.
Interesting, yeah, good point. And so at the end of verse 14, it mentions that give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. It seems to me, that Paul, he cared about how the church looked to those outside. He didn't want, someone to rightfully be able to point to evil or something that's going on in the church that's wrong. It'd be a bad reflection on the church, give them reason to attack. And so, he cared about how the church looked, and that was another reason why he did not want, the younger women to be enrolled in this, because of the possibility of their indiscretions. But it's not an absolute necessity that they remarry. It's not a requirement. It's just that they can't be enrolled into the church support. Verse 15, it says, for some have already turned aside from Satan. So this isn't just a possibility. It seems like this is happening. The younger widows have done this and turned aside, turned away from the faith, turned to Satan. So this seems to be that it's already actually happened. And then verse 16, again, it says, if a believing man or woman has widows, let them relieve them, and do not let the church be burdened, that it may relieve those who are really widows. So again, it's the family's responsibility first to provide for their widows, and so the church is not burdened with this. And so only those that are truly widows and widows indeed can be enrolled into the program. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Any more comments? Okay. Next week we will get into lesson 7. You might go ahead and do lesson 7 and lesson 8. I think lesson 7 is only 8 verses or so. We may get through that pretty quick. So you might want to go ahead and do lesson 8 as well. And we'll see how far we get. So thank you for all the comments. Appreciate it.